In this section, we're going to start making some changes to our deployment configuration file and just verify that all the pods that are associated with this deployment successfully get updated. So in particular, I really want to try updating the container port value down here from 3000 to some other value, because you will recall that when we tried changing that container port inside of our client-pod.yaml file, we very quickly got an error message saying, hey, you can't update that value. Okay, so back inside of the client deployment, so we're in the deployment file right now, I'm going to find the container port, and I'll update the port to 99999 like so. Now, just so you know, when we change this port assignment, you will no longer be able to visit our application inside of the browser. So in case you apply this update and then try to test it out inside the browser, it's not going to work because the container doesn't care about port 999. It wants to expose traffic on port 3000. Okay, so now that we changed our configuration file, I'm going to make sure that I save the file, and then I'm going to go back over to my terminal, and we're going to do the same thing we always do anytime we want to update an object. We'll do a kubectl apply-f client deployment.yaml. So I'll run that, and then it tells us very directly that an existing object type with this name was configured. It says configured as opposed to something being created. So we definitely just made a change to an existing deployment as opposed to creating a new one entirely. We can now do a kubectl get deployments to print out all of our deployments. Yep, it's still there. I can do a kubectl get pods, and now with this, you're going to see something a little bit more interesting. Notice how the age of this pod right here is 26 seconds. So clearly, when we apply this configuration file right here, Kubernetes noticed that we made a change to the template for the pods that are being controlled by this deployment. It saw that we changed the container port. And so rather than trying to update the existing pod that already existed, it deleted that pod and completely recreated it with the new container port value right here. Okay. Now, one thing that would be really nice to do is make sure that this new pod right here is in fact running with that new port. So I'll do a kubectl describe pods. We'll get the long form description about this pod right here, and we'll probably be able to verify that port 999 is assigned to it. Now remember, when you do describe pods, the name of whatever you want to look up is completely optional. In this case, we only have one pod, so I'll just print out the information about all pods because, hey, there's only one. Okay, so when I run that, I'll scroll up a little bit, and then I should be able to see our list of containers. Here's the client container, and it has port 999 mapped on it. So without a doubt, this pod is running with the most up-to-date configuration. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now, I want to do one other change, or one or two other changes here. Let's first try scaling up our replicas setting right here. So when we scale up from 1 to something like, say, 5, we're now going to have our deployment attempt to create 5 different pods, all with this identical template right here. So I'm going to make sure I update replicas to 5. I'll save the file, and then as usual, we'll do a kubectl apply client deployment.yaml. And now, if you type in very quickly kubectl get deployments, we might, okay, a little bit too slow in that case, you'll notice that everything says 5 right here. If we were a little bit faster, we might be able to see that there are less than 5 of these different pods available. We'll make another change in a second that will hopefully be able to, if we type in this get deployments fast enough, we might be able to see the update in action. And we'll see something like, hey, only 5 or maybe 1 or even 0 pods are currently available. So if we now do a kubectl get pods, you'll notice we have 5 separate pods, each of which are running a unique copy of that very specific client, let's see, multi-client, that's the idea, or that's the name of it, multi-client image. So we now have 5 containers running, each in their own very separate little pod. Let's try making one more configuration change. So how about instead of running the image multi-client, let's try running the image multi-worker instead. So I'm going to change the name of the image that we're running inside this pod. I'm going to make sure I save the file. And now this time, after we do the kubectl apply-f client deployment, I'm I'm going to very quickly, right after I run this command, I'm going to very quickly do a kubectl git deployments. And hopefully we'll see some different numbers of containers, or different numbers of pods inside there as the deployment is creating and destroying some of the pods inside of our cluster. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter here, and then very quickly I'll do a kubectl git deployments. Now that's interesting. So notice I typed in fast enough that I was able to see some different numbers in action here. So the client deployment wants to have 5 different pods with the very specific configuration listed right here. But at present, there are 7 pods. That means that maybe 5 of the old version exist, or actually, we can use these other numbers here to figure it out. So there are 7 pods total, and 4 of them are up to date and available. That means that we have 4 up-to-date and available pods running the newest configuration that says that we should be running the multi-worker image. That means that there are 3 other pods, because 7 minus 4 is 3. It means that there are 3 pods still sitting around using the old configuration, and those need to be deleted and cleaned up. If we now do kubectl git deployments again, we're probably going to see 5 across the board, because now all the old versions of those pods have been deleted and replaced with the latest up-to-date version of the pod spec, which says that we need to have the multi-worker image running inside there. Okay, so it's pretty interesting to see these deployments in action. So let's take another quick pause. We're going to come back to the next section, and I want to point out 1 or 2 kind of interesting things about this entire deployment system that might trip you up when you start making use of it in a production environment. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.